So I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started with today's webcast. Excited to welcome everyone here today. We are going to be talking about Enterprise Data Management Cloud today, which I'm really excited about. We're going to be focusing on how we can migrate from DRM or EPMA to EDM, and why would you even want to, what are the different steps involved in that process. Again, my name is Tracy McMullen with Interrel. I am coming up on my 15-year anniversary with Interrel, so that's really exciting, and glad to be talking with you guys today. Did want to make sure you guys knew about the upcoming Hyperion Solutions Conference. So this is going to be taking place in October. It is a free virtual conference, and if you are an old school EPM resource, a space resource, you may remember the Hyperion Solutions Conference that we all used to attend prior to the Oracle acquisition. And it was a really fun conference with lots of good technical information, product information, customer stories. And so the band is getting back together again. So would encourage you guys to join us. It's free. There's going to be different tracks of different sessions, and there's going to be presenters from Oracle, partners, customers. In fact, if you are interested in speaking, we would love to have, we're trying to get a wide variety of folks. So we're looking for speakers or if you just want to attend. So if you just visit epm.bi/Hyperion, that will get you to the link with some good information about this conference. I did want to also mention our 3-day virtual strategic assessment that NRL is doing right now. So some of you guys, and right in line with kind of the content that we're going to be talking about today, what should we be doing in the cloud, and where should we be going? What is the current state with the products? Do we need to move now? Should we move later? Should I move from DRM to EDM? And looking specifically at some of your existing requirements, pain points, and challenges. So what we're doing in these days of Corona, a lot of times we have a very involved kind of 2 to 3 week strategic assessment process. What we've done is we meet in person and we have a series of workshops. We've condensed that down into a 3-day virtual strategic assessment. So a little bit less investment, but you still get some really good tangible detail deliverables that will help you figure out kind of your roadmap, where you need to be going based on your current state. So I encourage you guys to look at that particular option that's offered by Interrel. And with that, we will jump into the content for today. So we are talking about migrating from DRM into the cloud version of the tool. Before we get there, I wanted to just quickly recap on, in case we have some new folks to the world of data governance and dimension maintenance. Again, what we're talking about here is using a series of tools, whether we're using DRM today and on-premise, to help manage our dimensions, our hierarchies. So we're not talking about numbers and how much revenue or how much expense or cost. We're talking about our account dimension and how our GL account strings roll up in our chart of accounts. We're talking about our legal entity structure and how all of our legal entities are going to consolidate up. We may be talking about our region dimensions and our different locations and how maybe our area field rolls up to an area, rolls up to a region, and then up to a total geographic roll up. So we're often managing these dimensions of data so that we can group them, categorize them, and aggregate data by them. Now, what happens is that oftentimes this information resides in a lot of different places and can have individual nuances. So we need a series of tools to help us manage this. Again, some of the real world challenges, if you don't have a standard tool to help you manage your dimensions or a standard data governance solution in place, it's a lot of manual effort, non-standard reporting, inconsistencies and hierarchies, data not reconciling because things are not rolling up correctly, or you don't have apples to apples across your systems, which ends up with the issues of losing confidence in the accuracy of the data and being able to report it. It increases the time to report because you're trying to do all these different reconciliations and understand what's happening with your hierarchies and your structures. So you really need data governance solutions in place. And I'm assuming many of you guys are living this on a day-to-day basis. Probably most of you guys are on DRM and you implemented DRM to specifically address these challenges. The challenges, of syncing up dimensions across a number of different systems. You may also be using these data governance tools, so DRM or EDM, we'll talk about this, to help manage kind of the mapping, consolidating, reconciling of multiple charted accounts. So you may be kind of a global enterprise where you've consolidated, acquired different companies, and there are different ERPs within your organization with completely different charted accounts. How do those all map up to our standard management reporting chart of accounts? This is where EDM DRM solutions can really add a lot of value in providing a business user way for them to maintain those mappings. We also, if you're a very acquisitive company, you can also use these solutions to be able to very quickly incorporate chart of accounts. So from a corporate restructure standpoint, another common challenge is being able to, your organization is going to go through a reorganization and they want to move departments, divisions around. What is that structure going to look like? And again, oftentimes, if you don't have a tool like DRM or EDM in place, that process is very challenging. And you're probably doing it in Excel and who's changing what and the integrity of it. And it's not really a naturally hierarchical tool. This is where DRM EDM has really solved those solutions. So again, DRM is an awesome tool. I remember back when I first saw it and implemented it. I was working for MD Anderson Cancer Center, and I met Doug Cosby, who created this many, many years ago, and it was so powerful. I remember developing a custom type solution to try and do the same things that DRM was doing, and DRM was just an amazing tool. So DRM is still great. It is still alive and well in the community and supporting dimension maintenance, hierarchy maintenance, those mapping requirements, and kind of all the different use cases that we just talked about. However, we now have a new solution. So DRM is on premise. It requires a server, requires IT support to have it. So there's a new cloud solution, and that tool is called Enterprise Data Management. And again, it is kind of the new direction where a lot of the research and development, most of that's happening, in these cloud-facing tools. There's still some work and some support going on with DRM, but really kind of where you want to direct your eyes is to EDM. So not that you have to do this immediately, but EDM is at a place where I think it's very viable for some of the DRM customers to go ahead and migrate into the cloud, so that if your strategy is to get to the cloud, your servers are old, and you don't have the IT support, you're having compatibility issues, this is where the cloud really begins to make a lot of sense. So EDM can do those same things that you guys have been using DRM to do, to manage your dimensions, hierarchies, and processes. So I'm going to just, again, we'll focus most of the content today about the steps to migrate, but I did want to just do a really fast introduction for Enterprise Data Management Cloud in case you haven't seen it or seen some of the UIs. So I have some screenshots embedded in here. I have some recorded demos, so if there is something that you would like to see, I can hop into one of our environments or I can share you. So definitely please in the chat section, if you guys have any questions or want to see anything, please post those and I'll hit that at the end. So EDM, like DRM, allows business users to manage the master data, our dimensions, our hierarchies. There are audit controls and accountability. There's the tracking of all the different changes that take place, much like in DRM. Again, it's a user tool. This is not really an IT tool. And from there, we can actually, where we need mastering and we want to sync hierarchies across all of our different applications, EDM provides those capabilities. There are system, oh man, I have a couple of different slides. I'm going to go ahead and update this because approvals, screen sharing stopped, just one second. Approvals are here. Bear with me one sec, and okay, so So I want to make sure, because I didn't want that to get recorded on the webcast, so the approvals are here. So those were introduced, policies, collaboration, all the workflow. Those were introduced in actually in 2019. So my slide was old, and I'm not sure quite how I missed updating that. We also have the ability to easily compare hierarchies across different target, source and target applications, different ways to kind of master the data. So I'll kind of walk you through some of that. Some of the features, again, this is the next generation DRM. There is a new design underneath the covers, which is why we're going to learn there's not really there's not a direct migration tool that we can take advantage of, but that's because they kind of really went back and re-architected it to be a much more kind of flexible, agile solution where DRM is great, and again, it really focused on the concepts of mastering, but as we know, a lot of times our target systems that we're pushing to, there are nuances. There are nuances and differences that need to take place. And so DRM could be kind of tricky and a little bit restrictive in that fashion, where in enterprise data management, it can be very flexible. So you can still do mastering concepts, but you've got the flexibility to allow for differences that are occurring in the various different target applications. We'll see in just a little bit. It's kind of a shopping cart experience, a request-driven set of changes that can be reviewed, validated before actually committing into the EDM repository. We have our same capabilities to be able to understand the impact of changes, be able to compare hierarchies side by side. We can kind of drag and drop if we're doing maintenance or, thinking of hierarchies in a manual fashion. We can do that automatically, but we can also do it manually, and it's a drag and drop experience. We have the ability to connect into our EPM cloud. We can connect into the Oracle Cloud, HCM, Financials GL. I think there's new EBS kind of connectors, which really helps us facilitate the integration of pushing and pulling hierarchies from those systems. So really fast. And again, I have demos, but I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of walk you through some of the UIs and some of the screens and talk about the features and functions. And then if we have time at the end, if there's something specific you want to see, we can talk through this. This is the homepage. So the homepage of EDM looks a lot like your EPM cloud, if you have seen this. Simplified user interface, organized into cards and clusters. So imagine your phone where you've got all your different apps. This is, designed to be kind of a similar look and feel. Now, the screen you're looking at is from an administrator standpoint. Really, the first two cards, views and requests, are what your end users see as they're going to be managing the hierarchies and the dimensions. You can create a series of views. These are what users are going to interact with. So if they're ready to do account maintenance on the account dimension, they would click on the account maintenance view. If they were doing some entity maintenance, they could click on the entity maintenance view. You also see views that are organized by a target system. So the enterprise planning view would contain the dimensions for the planning application, or we've got GL, those would have the GL segments. So you can click, all of these are hyperlinks, and so you click on this and it will jump you into one of the views. So here I clicked on the corporate GL view, and I can see these are the different segments for my corporate GL. And you can very quickly search hierarchies. You can navigate down the hierarchy. You can see very quickly, just with the clues or visual cards, see what are upper levels, what you get down to a lower level. In this case, I can see the name and the description. I can add additional columns, so we can kind of customize what users see in the screen, and then you can see all of the different properties over to the left. Now, if I prefer to see properties down below, there's multiple ways to kind of configure. I can also hide these various different items. So, and then again, this is looking at the account dimension. I can click on company, and then that would pull up the company viewpoint, line of business viewpoint, cost center, and then you could see those hierarchies from there. So this is a hierarchical dimension. In some cases, and especially when we're talking about maybe maintaining structures for our trees for our ERPs, they're just lists and not really hierarchies. So EDM does support a list type dimension or segment, and then a hierarchical version as well. You have the ability to search for nodes. So as you start to type in, the search capability will search the dimension that you're looking for. And again, as you start to type in different additional keys, it'll further refine the list. And then this is a hyperlink, so then I can click on that hyperlink and it'll jump me to the node that I'm looking for. We also have the ability to download any of these nodes, the hierarchies, to Excel. So that's helpful. So you can download the whole dimension if you wanted to. If you just wanted to do a section, you just pick the top level node and you can download to the file. One thing that's really cool is that you could also then make updates in Excel, and then you could re-import or re-upload that file and incorporate those changes. The administrators are the ones who set up these views and viewpoints. They can control what the users do. So you may want to have a view-only viewpoint, or you may only want to let users insert nodes, add nodes, and move nodes around, but we don't want them to delete. So we could actually uncheck the delete option. We could uncheck the reorder if there's a certain order that we wanted to maintain. So you can control, administrators can control how users are going to be interacting with those viewpoints. From a new request shopping cart experience standpoint, this is what the users will do. So when they first log in, they open up a viewpoint. It's really kind of a read-only standpoint. So if they want to make a change, they click on new request, and then as they start to make changes, it's going to accumulate in their shopping cart. You have the ability to rename the request. It assigns it a default number that you could rename it. And then the users can then begin to, start to make changes. So if they need to insert in top nodes, if they want to make changes to any of the property values, so you can see here the items that are highlighted yellow have been changed and or updated. And then that shows up that our node 60 has a number of items that have been updated, and you can see those in the shopping cart. They can continue to make changes. So we can see we've updated node 60, node 70, node 40 with a number of different changes and set those properties. And the properties could be freeform. They could be drop-down selection. So a number of different, it could be a date, a text, a number, and we can put in validations for all of these different properties. There's already built-in system properties based on connected apps, so it's going to have your, FCC has some certain rules about dimensions, Planning Cloud has some certain rules about these nodes and properties, and those are going to already be built for you. But then if you want to layer in your own custom business properties, you can add property validations, you can do that as well. You do have the ability to delete nodes. It could be a little bit dangerous, but it's possible, and that's why sometimes you might want to remove that from the user standpoint, so you have a more controlled process when nodes are being deleted. Notice that again, it's as you click, if you needed to go back to a change, you just click on a hyperlink, and it's going to jump you to those changes in your shopping cart. Okay, and so again, lots of different actions, adding nodes, inserting nodes, removing, editing, deleting, a lot of what you have from a DRM perspective. You also have the ability to load changes from a file. So this is where I mentioned, you could download a node and all of its properties updated in Excel, and then import it back in. And it's not really import, I need to just say it's a load. You can upload or load request items. So within the request, you can select this option, and you can have your Excel spreadsheet, load these changes in. This looks a lot like your action script in DRM, so where you have an action code and what you're wanting to do. And so you could upload those. Now your shopping cart has validation checks for you. Now some of the validations are going to, as you update properties, happen like real time. Sometimes you can actually make that update, and again, when it's in the shopping cart, it hasn't, notice there's a status of draft, so it hasn't been committed yet. But you'll be able to see and kind of go through the list of issues. So you can see here, I've added in a node, but a node already exists within this node type. So you get that message, you can see the details, so then you can go ahead and, at this point, I can actually use the ellipsis and I could remove this item from the request since this node already exists. Notice that you see the submit button at the top. So once I've gone through and I've addressed any issues or validations and everything is green and there's a 0 in this exclamation points or kind of alert validation section, I can then click submit, and then those changes are made. So again, from a request feature standpoint, you can see all the changes that have been made or proposed to have been made with hyperlinks. You can view any of the issues. You also have the ability to add comments, and you can add attachments as well. User clicks submit, and then those changes get made. Now, if you have implemented workflow and approvals, you can also have that request, once they click submit, gets routed to the next person kind of in the policy process. You can have a number of different collaborators be collaborating on your nodes. So it doesn't have to be tied to a single person. You can actually have a number of folks that may be contributing to different areas of the dimension maintenance process. At any point, you can view previous requests. You can also view kind of the history of a node and see how it has changed over time and who changed it. So we have kind of all of that history available to us. So that is because again, I want to make sure I'm going to get time to talk about kind of the migration for DRM to EDM. That's my really brief introduction for EDM, and really kind of showing you what it looks like from an end user perspective. So now we're going to jump into migrating DRM to EDM. So first, we're going to go through kind of some mapping of terms and definitions. So in DRM, we had dimensions, we had versions, we had property categories, and kind of went through this life cycle process. That's very different. And again, we kind of have these EDM applications in this new data model that we'll talk about that's just different. So kind of the end user piece of it is not that different, but under the covers it is. So kind of just keep that in mind as you're going through this migration process. It's just on a little bit of a learning curve, not a big one, but just to kind of learn how under the covers this works from an EDM perspective. So if we look at some of our kind of terminology, you have kind of the DRM terms and concepts, and then what's the related EDM feature. I won't go through all of these because you'll have the table available to you. We will send out the slides. But the DRM application is completely different from an application in EDM. You actually in EDM, you're going to create an EDM application for every source or target that we're pushing hierarchies to. Where in DRM, we just have kind of one application. So you got to make sure to completely toss that out. Those two things are totally different. We also had versions or groups of hierarchies in DRM. There's no versions that kind of goes away. But what you can do is you kind of have your main you have your connected target application. So I've got my planning EDM application, I've got my FCC EDM application, I've got my ERP EDM app. Those are going to contain kind of the current structures that we have that are bound to those target systems. But what I can do is I can make copies of views and viewpoints that are not bound so that we can stave off versions. We can have archived versions, of points in time. So it's, we can accomplish the same thing, but it's different. Nodes are the same, hierarchies are the same, we still have properties. There are no property categories yet. And really the reason is because we created property categories in DRM because we didn't have these different target applications. So in EDM, we're going to be creating EDM applications for each target that should just have the properties that we need for that target system. So there's not really a need for property categories. However, it's kind of a not yet thing because there's a few cases where depending on how you design EDM, it could be helpful. So I do think it's something that might be coming soon, but not available yet. And again, it's really because the overall architecture is a little bit different. There are validations built into the system. We do import in dimensions, action scripts. Again, there's not something called an action script, but you guys will see as we load from Excel, it looks an awful lot like our action scripts. There is no blender or blender functionality yet in DRM, in EDM. We have that available to us. We have the ability in DRM to create exports, all different kinds of exports. So we can do that same thing in EDM, but we don't have custom export capabilities. We can really export out target applications to our EDM applications in various different properties, which again should be designed to match your target system. So the theory is you don't really need a custom export. However, we know in real life, there might be something that we want to do. So again, I think those custom exports are on the to-do list. And again, there are ways to kind of meet that requirement if you had the need. But again, how we usually design EDM usually eliminates the needs for the custom exports that we did in DRM. Node access group, it's just different. So security is similar but different when you move over into the cloud, but you're going to be able to accomplish many of the same things. We do have inherited properties, derived properties, default properties. We're going to have to kind of define in turn and set those settings on an EDM, but all those same features that you did in DRM, you can now do in EDM. Orphans or missing nodes, those are available. We had a concept in DRM called local versus global properties and how things are inherited. And so that concept does not exist in EDM, but you can do some of the same things with the new data model and the node sets and hierarchy sets and whatnot. Alternate hierarchies are supported. Transaction history, so you can get to it. Right now, you can view the history and all the different changes by request, and or you can view that information by node. Larger type reports, those things are on the roadmap for EDM. Custom validations are supported now. You guys are likely using the command line utility for your automations in DRM. You'll have to move or rebuild your automations using EPM Automate, but it's a very similar kind of command line language from an automation perspective. Property queries, there's not really a property query feature in EDM, but you can search. Right now you can search on node names, and I think it may even already be out, the ability to search on all the different properties. You can also do the different comparisons that we can do in DRM. EDM has most of those same compare features. So I mentioned that there's a new kind of design model or data model underneath the covers. I think there is a really, and I should have included the link to this, there's a really good EDM video that Oracle put out that kind of walks you through kind of how this concept works, that you're going to create these EDM applications within an EDM application. You'll have a dimension that will be composed of one or more node types. Those node types can contain one or more hierarchy sets, and then the hierarchy sets can contain one or more node sets. So I'm not going to get into the details in this presentation, but just kind of understand, and really honestly, it's important for you to kind of understand the nuances. But what we've seen from an implementation standpoint is we really kind of implement simplified standpoint, and where you have your applications and your dimensions and your views and your viewpoints that you're managing. And then what we can do, what Integral can do, is help you behind the scenes kind of set up this additional layer to design it to support the hierarchies that you guys have. So with that, we're kind of all the way in what are the steps then? So kind of understanding what EDM is, what does it look like, some basic features, kind of seeing some of what are the DRM features and how those translate into EDM. Now, what are the steps? So the very first thing I recommend that everyone do is kind of go through your requirements in a prototype phase, right? So kind of asking yourself questions about your current process and then prototyping it. And then we're going to, once we've done that, we're going to export out our hierarchies from DRM. We're going to register, create the applications in EDM. We're going to import in that file from DRM into EDM, and we're going to test and validate. So let's see what each one of these components look like in a little bit more detail. So first, requirements, that you're going to be looking at is, and I encourage you guys to take an opportunity to not just move things over the way that you've always done it for the past 5+ years that you've been doing it in DRM. This may be an opportunity to clean things up. Maybe take the opportunity to change the design to be more efficient, more flexible. So don't just move things over and do as is, really take some time. So, how do we sync up things across our different systems? Is this a point where we can maybe clean up some of our naming conventions and get things more in line with each other? What's kind of the current human workflow component? If you have DRM, you may or may not have implemented DRG. There was kind of an additional cost associated with that, a little bit more complicated to implement. I should have put this on my my comparison slide, but when you get to EDM, kind of that collaboration workflow is built in. There's no REST API required. We can do the kind of approval processes and the collaboration kind of built in a UI format, right? So you may not have implemented that in DRM because you didn't have bandwidth or didn't, you know, want to kind of take on the additional cost associated with it. But it's definitely something you should look at when you move to EDM. You know, involving all the different, you know, application owners, the sources and the target systems, and kind of different data elements, right? So what all have you implemented in DRM, what needs to go, what needs to change? There are some key questions when it comes to designing EDM. So, you know, what are the dimensions we're going to maintain in EDM? What are the sources? What's the flow? What are the targets? What's the flow? You know, is EDM going to be the source where all the master data is maintained and then it pushes to all the different systems? Or in some cases, maybe, you know, new accounts are going to continue to be created and maintained in the ERP system. We need to import those into EDM, and then we maintain the reporting hierarchies from there. So again, for each dimension, because it could be different, right? On all these different dimensions, your project dimension could be coming from a project management system. Your product could be coming from some other sales system. So again, where's it coming from? But then also stopping and asking the question, should EDM be the source? Can we get, you know, again, because it is sole purpose in life is to maintain, you know, hierarchies, business attributes and whatnot with a business user interface with validations and sources. So even if we have traditionally created products in this, you know, this other system, does it make more sense for us to move that process now? Okay, and then let's do it in EDM so we can leverage the best practice technology and then, you know, and then push it back to that system. We have the history, I mean, all the different benefits that we talked about at the very beginning. Why do we even use these tools? It's important if we're looking at like EPM to kind of understand the cubes that we're connecting to, the S6 cubes that we're connecting to, what are the hierarchies, what are the properties that we need, what are the validations and rules, understanding what are the commonalities and the differences for each dimension across systems. What's the process and the flow? Who are the users and the collaborators? How should that work? Also mapping. So EDM is great at maintaining mappings and then, you know, sharing that with, let's say, data management to help, you know, map and integrate data. Some of the specific DRM questions that you need to ask, again, because these are some things that, one, either the feature doesn't exist or you're going to have to kind of do a little bit of rebuilding to kind of pull it over. So what are property categories? Those property categories are likely going to kind of translate to an EDM application from a design standpoint, but it's important to kind of understand how and why you are using those and then thinking through the design of what it looks like in EDM. What derived properties and logic are you using? What custom validations you know, do you have today? And again, asking yourself the question, just because it exists today, do we really need it in the new system? Looking at the automated processes, looking at blenders. So how are you using blenders today? So making sure you provide those details so that, you know, you know, you can kind of figure out how am I going to address that requirement because the blender feature is not actually available. Custom exports, so reviewing what custom exports you have today, why you have those custom exports. Again, a lot of times those custom exports were happening because we had different systems we were connecting to. That is addressed by the EDM application design. So likely you're going to be fine there, but it's good to understand how that works. Property queries, if you were heavily using that feature, why you were using that feature so we could kind of think through alternative design. And then again, are you using data governance? What's your data governance process? What were the steps? So really looking at that overall and then seeing how that's going to translate into the EDM process. Or if you weren't using it at all, you know, what do you want it to be? Because that is something you can easily add into the project. Another kind of recommendation, this is an important lesson learned that we had on a project. it's almost been 2 years now, maybe. We implemented EDM when it first came out, but we actually had some issues getting connected into some of the on-premise sources or cloud sources. So making sure, you know, to IT, whoever, that we're going to be connecting and pushing hierarchies into their systems, and/or we need to pull some data out of those systems, making sure you've got access, right? And so especially when you're talking about pushing hierarchies, dimension segments to your ERP, that can be, you know, a little more involved and requires some, you know, some involvement from your ERP resources. And a lot of times you're going to want to test this process before you go live in production. So do they have, you know, a sandbox environment that looks like production so you can truly test it and validate it? So just know that sometimes that can be slower. Firewall, single sign-on, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Make sure you've got that connectivity before you get started. So we've done our prototype. So what we're going to be doing now is the steps. We're ready to get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is just in DRM, we just are going to create a new export. We might can leverage an existing export if possible. But what we want to do is likely create a new export to basically get the dimension and the properties out of DRM and import that into EDM. So in DRM, again, if this is DRM call, you guys have done this process, you understand this. So we're gonna, you know, create the export, select the columns that we want, any filters, and then get that file ready to load into EDM. So EDM is looking for a parent-child format, CSV file, and again, its headers are going to need to match whatever we call the properties in EDM. So in a lot of cases, especially when we talk about all of our different EPM properties, those are going to be the same. But in some cases, we may need to rename some of the headers in our DRM export to kind of match so we can easily upload that into EDM. The two most important columns are going to be your name and parent column. I mentioned the data model also has something called node types, and you have to define that if you have more than one node type defined within the EDM application for that dimension. So again, I have a couple of slides on the data model, but if you find node type, then you don't actually have to have this column. It will understand where it needs to build that element. So again, DRM exports. I'm assuming if you're in this session to migrate your DRM application to EDM, you've worked with exports before. Now, DRM has a couple of different options for exports, and the one that you guys are going to choose, make sure, okay, sorry. The one that you guys are going to choose is the hierarchy export because we want that parent-child format. You're going to go through the wizard process to pull over, you know, what are all the different properties that we're going to be, you know, we want to pull that data so we can import it into EDM. So we choose the columns, only the columns that we want for EDM. We can apply filters. You guys have been through this process. You can also have custom headers. So again, this is potentially a place where you could rename the DRM properties with what the new EDM properties are going to be so that it matches, because EDM is looking for that exact match. You can then go, we're going to spit this out to a comma delimited file that we can then import into EDM once EDM is ready. Okay, so that's your first step. The next step is to do the EDM application registration process. And really, this is the bulk of the project that you're going to be doing. So you're going to register the application and basically set EDM up so that you're ready to import in that information. And so, you know, you would think register the application, that's just one step, but really it's several different steps that you're going to need to go through to build those applications. So as I mentioned, we have a different EDM application for each source or target that we have. So for example, FCC, I have to register the FCC application. So I click on the applications card, and then I'll see the register option if I need to register a new application. This is an old screenshot because I think there's actually a couple of other options now available to us. I think there's FCC, we'll see Fusion GL Cloud, we'll see EBS, I believe, as additional options. So we can do these direct connect apps if those exist, or we can do a custom. So EDM can manage hierarchies dimensions for any system. If you don't have a direct connect type application, then what you do is you choose custom. When you do that, you go through the wizard process, and it will take you through a series of screens where you will pick and choose the dimensions and define the dimensions for those applications that you want to maintain. So if you're talking about Planning Cloud, FCC Cloud, you're going to be using EDM to manage your account dimension, your entity dimension, a product or region dimension. So you're going to define those dimensions within the application registration process, so that EDM will kind of know, it'll connect in, and be able to have that syncing process, and kind of understand the smart dimensionality with the target app. If it's a custom application, you're actually going to be creating your own custom properties, right? So you have the ability, there's going to be some out-of-the-box properties that you can assign to an application, but you can create your own custom properties as well. So properties, when you're creating custom ones, you can define whether you want the property to, what's the default value, what's the default type. You can also have it be a derived property. You can set inheritance if you want inheritance to be used within your dimension. Again, all of these kind of property settings are going to already be set for you for your properties that you use for FCC, Planning Cloud, Fusion GL, and EBS. They kind of have already done that work for you. But if you have a custom app, then that requires something unique, then you're going to be setting up this information as you go through the application process. So you're going to register the application, set the dimensions, and assign the properties, creating new properties where you need to for those custom apps. Again, another thing to note too with some of the properties that come out of the box, I don't show it in the screenshot, but there's all of the kind of EPM intelligent properties, data storage, consolidation tag. You can use those properties even in a custom application as well. So you don't have to recreate those, you can just take advantage of this. Once a property has been created for one application, you have the ability to kind of leverage that where you need to in other places. So we've registered the application, selected the dimensions that we needed for it, assigned the properties. Again, if we need to create derived properties, I want to make sure you guys know there's an expression builder that can be used. This was rolled out in October. We had more enhancements in December of 2019, and I think we've even had updates since then as well. So, and we've done some pretty neat things with kind of, really automating some of the metadata property population. And we want to reduce the amount of clicks, the manual steps that are required in EDM, even though it's really easy, where we can automatically populate something. We want to do that if we can do that from a logic-based standpoint. So we can create derived properties as well. So once we've registered the applications, it's going to automatically create views and viewpoints for the target application that we've created. But we may want to create additional ones. So we may want to create that account maintenance view with viewpoints, the account dimension from FCC, the account dimension from Planning Cloud, the account dimension from the GL. So again, some of the view and viewpoints are going to be created automatically by the application, EDM application we create. We may want to create additional ones for some of these other use cases. So the process to go through and create the viewpoints, again, I only have the high level steps here because I think as I started to pull together the content, I was like, this should really be 2 hours. And then I pulled in some more content. I'm like, oh, this is maybe like our half-day training class to walk you through kind of just the details. What I would say is Oracle's got some great tutorials out there. NRL offers an EDM class, so it's kind of just a one-day class to take you through these basics, and you can see the details. So I'm just showing you some of the highlights of each of the different steps that you'll have to do. So if you do create views and viewpoints, you kind of go through, the administrator will go through this process likely and create the new viewpoints and create the views and assign the viewpoints. There is a concept of bound, unbound, and this is where if you've got, if it's bound, then as you make changes, as you're making changes in those target bound applications. But if we wanted to have like a version saved off of a viewpoint that I just want to keep, this is my January 19 set of hierarchies. I'm going to keep this just in case. But, as future changes are made, I don't want to update this particular viewpoint. That would be an unbound viewpoint that you can have. So there is a concept, and as you go through the definition process, in some cases you want it to be bound, some cases you don't want it to be bound. Another step that you guys will need to do, likely, not, again, you don't have to, but you likely want to create node type converters. So what we have seen is that all of our customers really want to do some level of mastering. They want to make the changes one place and then have, have all the applications be updated. And node type converters are what allow you to do that. So, so you're going to create node type converters to, let's say you've got your GL application with your list of cost centers, and those are just 4-digit codes. Someone comes in and adds a new 4-digit cost center. I want my planning cloud to also add that new cost center in, but I want to prefix it with TC. So your node type converter is what does that. It helps kind of the mapping of, okay, when something gets added here, I also want to add it here, and then this is a prefix. So again, if a user manually adds a cost center and then you click and drag it and you pull that into your planning app, it'll automatically add that node in. So node type converters also work with subscriptions. So subscriptions are what, once you've set that up, that's what's going to happen automatically. So the user comes in, adds the cost center, any subscribing applications will automatically receive that new cost center. So those are steps that you're going to want to do likely. Again, you don't have to, but if you don't set up node type converters and subscriptions, then you're going to, if you add a new cost center, you have to add new cost center to FCC, you got to add a new cost center to planning, you got to add a new cost center to your GL. And you don't want to do that, right? We want to add it one place and have everything. And so node type converters and subscriptions are the two features that you set up to do that. And again, you can, and then subscriptions can work with your policies so that you can actually have levels of approval as well. You can also, so there's a number of different out-of-the-box validations that are going to take place intelligently if you've got direct connected apps with FCC and with Planning Cloud with GL, but if you have any custom validations that you want to build in to the system, you can do that, and it's kind of just a GUI expression builder to kind of layer in the logic, but you have the ability to do that. So, for example, if you want to have, your, trying to think of a good example from a recent client, if you have products should always be within this particular range if it's underneath this particular parent. So there's different, you can get super complex or you can be very simple with the validations that you build in. So that gets your applications registered. You've got your dimensions assigned to those applications, kind of the shell structure with all the different properties. And then you've got the views and viewpoints to maintain those kind of with some of the subscriptions that go on behind the scenes. So then the next step that you're going to be doing is you're ready to import in the dimension data. So I've got it all set up, and so that's from the application card. Once everything's been set up and configured, registered with that application process, you click on import. And so that's where I remember that DRM file that we had. We're taking that file and we're basically going to be importing it in for each one of those dimensions. So you're going to import in that process. And again, from a DRM perspective, we're going to be importing in that particular file. Do know that there's actually, if we are needing to import in dimensions from target systems, we can actually do that as well. So this is the example that, let's say you've got Planning Cloud up and running, you've been using Planning Cloud for a while, PDS, EDPCS, and you're ready to implement freeform planning cubes and you're ready to implement FCC. You need EDM to help maintain your hierarchies across those systems. You can actually import, set up EDM, register your applications. You can import the data from your PDCS application that will populate, and then at that point, you can flip-flop the direction. So there's some really neat features as far as kind of getting data in and out with those directed, direct connect applications. And I won't get into kind of how that works with these questions that are coming in. So then at that point, we imported in the dimension, everything should be populated within EDM. Kind of your last steps to implement is going to be setting up security and kind of all the approval workflow policies that you want to use, and who are the collaborators kind of going through that process. And then it's just a series of UIs, GUI user interface. There's no programming and again, we had to do that with the DRG in many cases using REST API to kind of build this stuff. This is more just kind of setting up, and it's URLs and you set up approvals and assign users, and it's a much straightforward user process to set that up. kind of your last step in your project is going to be going through and updating your automation processes, because there's a different automation tool that you're using. So you're going to be taking your command line utility options that you were doing in DRM and replacing that with EPM Automate. There are some other options as well, REST API. And again, if it's working, let's say you're using EDM, you're pushing to Hyperion planning. So if you're in that case, I was using EPMA. So now I'm gonna, from EPMA, I'm gonna make my planning application a classic application. Once it's an on-prem classic application, you're gonna use a tool called the outline load utility. So EPM Automate will essentially hand off your exported dimension, you know, and pass it to your outline load utility, which can import in that dimension into Hyperion planning. Same thing if you've got like on-prem S-Base, or if you've got S19C, or whatever the next generation S-Base is, you know, again, you're going to be using your EPM Automate script and kind of passing off to a Excel script to do some of those imports. So everything can be automated, definitely possible. EPM Automate is the primary tool that's used with EDM. And these are the different EDM commands that are available to you. So those are your steps, which I'll tap again in just a bit, but you know, your steps to kind of get that application created in your data over. So then at that point, make sure you've got this, right? So then you're ready to test and validate in EDM. So you're going to be validating hierarchies and properties. You're going to be testing out the process flow and the security, and kind of making sure the request and collaboration process works the way you expect. My number one recommendation to you is that you know, set up your processes that are pushing your hierarchies to the different target systems, planning, FCC, S-Base, or GL, and you validate the data. That's the number one way to make sure that all those hierarchies are rolling out as they're expected to. So it's easy to kind of visually sign off on things, but sometimes when you actually go to reconcile the numbers and you see some numbers don't actually tie to what you expect, that'll help you catch those last items. So in conclusion, I haven't really talked about EPMA too much because I wanted to really go through kind of that DRM to EDM process, because really the process is going to be similar from an EPMA perspective. So the important news about EPMA applications in your on-premise application is when you upgrade to 11.2, EPMA is not going to be supported. You're going to have to take a step for your HFM application, your planning application, and S-Base if you were using S-Base, and you're going to have to send those into classic applications. So you have two options to use, like how am I going to maintain dimensions? And really technically you have three options. So when you go to 11.2, your one option that you have that I don't have listed here is just to maintain dimensions directly in the application itself, right? But if you have more than one application, that's going to be, you know, that's going to be a little bit more manually intensive, and or you'll have to set up scripts to like share dimensions. Anyway, that would be really nice. But if you only have one planning application or it's one HFM application, I would do that. Okay, so if you only have one application in on-premise, it's one HFM app, or it's one planning app, and that's it. You don't have to maintain dimensions across multiple applications. Then I would just make those applications classic, and you just use the native tool for the outline load utility or the dimension editor within Hyperion planning. If you have more than one application, which you likely do because you're using EPMA. EPMA allowed us to, again, you know, maintain a dimension and then sync it across a number of different applications. You can actually start using DRM in a limited use case and on-premise. So Oracle has decided to give on-premise customers, since they're taking away EPM, you could use DRM and use that to manage your hierarchies. There is a migration kit to kind of help take your EPMA ADS file and format that you could input in. Okay, so there's a patch number. I've got the link here to the white paper about it. Essentially what you have to do is EPMA has this ADS file that's kind of clunky, but you've been using it and are familiar with it. We need to basically get that out into a DRM import format so you can import in those hierarchies into the DRM dimensions. So that will be a step, but that's what you could do, and you can continue to use DRM to manage your hierarchies and run automations with your on-premise EPM application. So Hyperion planning, HPCM if you wanted to. I don't even think HPCM even is EPMA supported. But your HFM and your Hyperion planning applications are where we have traditionally seen it. Another option is considering, like, if you know you're going to the cloud and it's pretty imminent, this may be a good step, right? Your first baby step into the cloud. So instead of moving EPMA, you can actually to DRM and implement DRM, knowing that then I'm going to have to throw that away because eventually I'm going to go from DRM to EDM. Maybe I should go ahead and let me just go straight to EDM. So that's possible as well. And again, you can leverage the migration kit to kind of get out those dimension export files and then import it in. And then all the steps that I covered earlier about setting up EPMA with registering the application, assigning dimensions, creating properties, using viewpoints, subscriptions, all those things still apply. So those would be those steps. It's just instead of exporting dimensions out of DRM, you would be exporting dimensions out of EPMA using the ADS file to get it into a format that we can put it into. So those are really your options when it comes to EPMA. Again, if you guys have any specific questions, let me know and I can address those. So kind of, you know, I think this is the question that a lot of customers have been asking, and I've been in calls lately with them, you know, is it ready? So again, because EDM is a brand new tool, much like FCC was, and we're getting that same question on FCC, and really the answer is yes. Again, that requirements prototype section is really important to help flesh out. But over the last, you know, 6 to 9 months, the EDM team has been an amazing job of getting new features out. You know, parity items from DRM, as well as like new and improved things that we didn't even have before that now we have available to us. They're doing a great job and they're working really fast. It is amazing to see the change that is taking place with EDM. So I absolutely recommend you guys looking at it. You know, now in some cases it might not make sense. It's certainly possible, but I do think, you know, from a ready state standpoint, DRM customers, you know, a year ago, I don't know that I would have said that, but here in 2020, and in the current state of, you know, where the product management folks have gotten it, it's really exciting. So again, kind of those steps, and whether it's EPMA or DRM, right? So requirements and prototyping, I recommend you do for all of the EDM Cloud solutions. But then you're just going to essentially export out your hierarchies from DRM. You're going to register your application, assign the dimensions, create the properties, kind of all those components, import in that DRM file, test and validate, and then you're off and running. Kind of for just a few conclusion points, I'm going to open it up for questions. Again, it's a new data model, so there are some differences from it, and really it's a good thing. Because it gives us a lot more flexibility and agility when it comes to managing nuances between the different hierarchies that are required for our target system. It is not a integration tool. You know, I can't really, because the chances of, you know, you probably have not looked at your DRM design in a long time, and it may be a good time to like really revisit and see what do we need, what do we like. Okay, yes, we definitely want to bring that over. What's some other stuff that's really a headache or very manually intensive? What can we do differently in the cloud to address that? As I mentioned before, from a feature function standpoint, it's growing rapidly. There's a lot of really exciting things that are coming with EDM. I think the trickiest part and I feel like the customers I'm talking to, licensing is kind of the trickiest part, right? Because EDM is a new subscription. So like you have DRM, you're paying your maintenance, and then in DRM you're paying maintenance, right? So you still have maintenance elements. You essentially have that. When you move to EDM, you're going to be getting a new cloud subscription, and they don't really have like a carryover, bring your license over to the cloud. Unfortunately, that would sure would be awesome. So just kind of keep that in mind, and that's probably kind of the biggest sticking point. So, you know, when you talk with Oracle, if there's things we can do to help you in those discussions and, you know, kind of bridge that gap, we can do that. But just know that it is kind of a new cost. Now, with that, again, you're going with a new technology. You don't have the server. You're going to have some savings, right? Because you don't have the server support, the IT required to support the servers, compatibility issues. There are some savings that come with it. However, it is going to be a new subscription cost. So with that, what I'd like to do, I think we're kind of right at the end, but have just a couple minutes. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. And then let me see from the Q&A. So one of the questions is, can we push a hierarchy into our relational table with EDM? So not yet with EDM natively. So again, you're going to be exporting, importing. It's file-based really right now. And again, it can push files directly over to, let's say, Planning Cloud, SVC Cloud, or like Fusion Cloud. It can move those files for you directly over, but it's still more of a file-based solution. I do think that connectivity for database is going to be coming at some point. What I will say, one of the tools that we're using on a lot of our projects now, because I feel like this is a missed area with Oracle, is kind of on GUI automations and connectivity into external systems with a third-party tool called OneCloud. So we have done it with EDM and OneCloud together, but again, that's another solution. Books are not available in EDM, but it's not, again, it's more of a different concept. So really your EDM application sort of functions like a book, right? So your EDM application is going to have your account dimension, your entity dimension, your region dimension, and then you can do those exports out, from that EDM application around that target. So it's a little bit different, but there is no book yet in EDM, or kind of like a series of exports that you want to do together. You typically will just kind of schedule those against your target EDM apps, then you can do that within EPM Automate. So you can achieve the same thing that the book does. It just may require 3 lines of scripting versus 1 that you maybe did with DRM. Any other questions? All right. Appreciate you guys joining today. And again, don't forget about the Hyperion Solutions Conference coming up, and to register either as a speaker or as an attendee. And with that, we'll let you go. Hope you guys have a great week.